What's up, guys? So today I just wanted to talk to you about this snazzy little device called the RetroPie. And it's not really the case, it's the actual board that's on here is the RetroPie. The rest is just the case that I picked out for it. But during one of the more recent episodes of the Multi-Tap podcast, which I was on, we had an in-depth conversation regarding the NES Mini and whether or not you should get one, and we took a look at all the games. But then at the end of the podcast, I asked the question, well, since the NES Mini is just emulation with an official Nintendo seal on it, what's really stopping you from getting a RetroPie? And during that segment, I pretty much convinced myself to buy one of these. And actually, as soon as the podcast was done, I went out and actually bought one and built one for myself. And I've been using this for about a week and a half now. Setting it up is pretty easy. If you've ever mounted like a virtual image of anything, it's not hard at all. You do have to have a few components to do it, and soon I'll be making a video on exactly how to set up your own RetroPie. With the size that this one has, this has 128 gigabytes in it, which is pretty astounding for something this small. It only costs me a little under $100, so that's about what you're looking at for this setup. But rather than the 30 games the NES Mini plays, I have this loaded with pretty much every game before the PlayStation 1. So, drastically different. So let's get into what actually is on this thing. So, first of all, on the back here, that's where you'll load your SD port, or if you get a modifier, like a cable converter, you can add in like an actual standard hard drive if you wanted to, if you were that crazy. I would just recommend going with an SD card, and honestly, if you're not planning on like loading it up with disk-based games, you could probably get away with just having a 64 gigabyte card, even maybe a 32 gigabyte card if you're just looking at doing like more 8-bit and 16-bit stuff versus disk-based games, which are going to take up way more space, along with like MAME games take up a lot more space. And so next we have an audio out port, an HDMI port, and a standard, I guess it's not mini USB, it's like the Android USB port. I think it's like mini HDMI, I'm not really sure, but it's the thing that all phones use to charge except for iPhones, long story short. And then you also got an Ethernet port and 4 USB ports, which is what you'll be using for your controllers, unless you're running off of its Bluetooth. And you don't even necessarily need to use the Ethernet port because you can also run this off of Wi-Fi, which is also built in. So it's actually a pretty impressive device. I mean, it has more options on it than even a lot of standard motherboards these days for PCs, so I think that's pretty interesting. For the most part, I haven't had too many issues, but there are a few consoles that don't run well, and a few consoles I haven't gotten working quite yet. But I think that just needs a little bit more setup on some of these. And also the other thing too is you also have to set up the BIOS for some of these things, like disc-based consoles, NeoGeo, PlayStation 1 all require BIOS to be set up, and we'll get into that in the actual like building of one of these. But let's go ahead and hook this up to the TV and take a look at what this thing can do. Alright guys, so what we have here is the basic menu setup for RetroPie, which is the front end to the Raspberry Pi that I have running, which allows me to run Emulation Station, which in turn is a multi-emulator setup for the RetroPie. So this is basically the main menu that you'll see right when you turn it on. Everything's alphabetical, which is nice. It does feature quite a few systems. For most of these systems, I have it set up with almost pretty much complete ROM sets for all these systems. So let's hop in and see what it looks like inside of one of these. And let's go with something everybody knows, like the NES. So when you hop in here, you'll see a list of all the games, and you know, you've probably seen on other people's videos where it has like the artwork for these, which you can add in. I recently had all the artwork added in for my RetroPie, and I ran into a whole bunch of issues with it changing the names of some of the files and stuff, because you can either do it yourself or you can have it automated for you to do it, which is done through this scraper thing. Unfortunately, when you have it do it automated for you, sometimes it can rename some games that you don't want it to. For instance, Adventure Island on the Game Boy, it named everything Adventure Island 2, including Adventure Island 1s, and you can't see what the file name is after it does that. So I found that was a major problem for me when it came to doing that. So I just decided to just leave it text only. It doesn't look as pretty. Maybe someday I'll go in and do it for certain consoles that I really care about, or like ones with smaller libraries, because it's easier to do. It would help if you had a keyboard hooked up to your Raspberry Pi when you do that, and it is keyboard compatible, which is great. However, you know, you want to be using it on your TV in your living room through HDMI. You don't want to have a keyboard hooked up to it. And so far, I've set up everything on this console without using a keyboard whatsoever yet. So that's something I'm pretty stoked about, I can say. So as you can see, pretty much a complete set of all the ROMs for the console. If you hold it down, it goes faster and gives you an idea of where you're at, like this. So let's just hop into something and just see how it runs. Obviously, older consoles like NES and like Super Nintendo, 16-bit, all this, they're all gonna work perfectly fine. And you can see I have it set up so you can use either the joystick or the D-pad. That is something you have to set up yourself. Usually it just defaults to the D-pad. And then it uses the X and Y buttons as turbo buttons, which is pretty cool by default on systems that don't have assigned keys for everything. So that's pretty interesting. And everything seems to run pretty much perfectly fine as far as I can tell on at least everything for this system. But let's take a look at some more like weird systems and see some issues that it does have. For instance, the Sega Saturn, which has always been a troubling system to emulate, considering they just recently cracked the code for this system, I want to say 4 months ago or something like that. It was definitely here in 2016 that they finally cracked the code for the Sega Saturn. So yeah, there's that for you. Unfortunately, this runs on Yao base, or whatever that's called, which I've had pretty good luck running on the PC, but running on the Raspberry Pi software, it pretty much runs abysmally. For instance, you'll see right here, this FMV sequence is running at best 3 frames per second. I'd say at best it's running that well, so it's definitely having major issues running it, and this kind of applies to every game I've attempted to do with the Saturn so far on the Raspberry Pi. Huge drag, I know, considering these games are so rare and whatnot, but it's just more reason, I guess, to own one and spend all your money getting 1 or 2 games for it. So that's unfortunate. This is one of the systems that definitely has a lot of issues. 32X runs fine. Sega CD, once you get the driver in, it runs, as far as I can tell, it runs very solid. I haven't had any of the... I haven't tested every single game yet, so I can't say for sure. But every game I have tested, for instance, like Lunar, Silver Star, Earthworm Jim, a couple of these other ones, I've definitely tested a few of these, and they've all ran very well. So that's good news, especially since a lot of that Sega Saturn stuff, like Snatcher here, is insanely expensive. So you'll see it kind of has like this weird DOS boot before every single thing. And what that screen actually allows you to do is you can go in and configure every single thing individually for these games. So you can also add in like a save state button or whatever if you want, or other things like that. So it gives you the option. The menus are really ugly when it comes to doing that, so you'll have to kind of bear with that. It kind of looks like, you know, like when you go into like the BIOS for your computer or something like that. But yeah, I mean, we're playing a $500 game on a device that only costs $100, so I'd say we're doing pretty good here. Alright, so moving on to the next systems we'll take a look at. Super Nintendo, everything seems to run completely fine. This is another system where I have, my ROM set has every single version pretty much ever released of every game, so that's kind of a drag. I need to go back in. I think I want to delete everything except for maybe like one version of a lot of these games, because having every single Japanese game and every single version of every game just makes it so hard to get through all these titles, because I mean I'm just swimming in Super Nintendo games here. So I mean, and you can see it's taken a while just to get through like these early letters, so it's kind of a drag in that sense, but everything runs fine with that. Vetrix, as far as I can tell, everything runs fine. It's hard to think of like actually like the names of all the Vetrix games, because you know, I wasn't, that thing was definitely around before I was born, but from what I can tell, for the most part, Vetrix seems to run correctly. I have had some experience messing around with one at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, so I do have an idea of like, you know, what these games should look like. They definitely don't look as good as they would on an actual Vetrix, considering how cool the Vetrix screen is. But nonetheless, it's still yeah, these menus are always so hard to. So yeah. Here it is. It's you know, it's running. But like I said, definitely not nearly as interesting of graphics as you would see on an actual Vetrix. But still cool that you can play these games, because I mean, who even has a Vetrix emulator on their computer, to be honest with you guys? You know what I mean? So then we got Virtual Boy. The Virtual Boy emulator seems to be pretty good from what I can tell. I have ran Virtual Boy emulators in the past because I've wanted to do a review of some of these games, because I was a huge fan of the console when I was a kid, and it's a pretty cool system. But I've definitely seen like a lot of issues with some of these emulators where it'll play through like most of a game and then it'll like really start falling apart the later you get into it. I'm thinking of the version of Wario Land for this system that did that, if I can find it. Virtual Boy Wario Land, there we go. I don't know why it's called that, it's such a weird name. But, you know, so it's got the exact same menus that you would see when you open a, when you turn on a Virtual Boy. I think it always wants you to automatically pause it so you don't damage your eyes. But yeah, as you can tell, it looks pretty good. I will admit that, and like especially like if you look at like Wario, like in the center of the screen, the reds do look a little washed out, and sometimes look like overly bright. So that's kind of a drag. But for the most part, I mean, these games are definitely like 100% playable. And there's not many of them, but you know, some of these games are really worth checking out. Like, for instance, this version of Wario is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Wario Land game that I've ever played. And I won't say that I've played the most modern ones, but this one's definitely really solid. I like it a lot. But let's go back to these menus and keep showing off the pie. So then we've got Atari 2600. Another insanely large ROM set I have for this, complete ROM set. Everything seems to play, you know, it plays just like you'd expect it to play. It's an Atari 2600, it's definitely dated. Put it that way. Whoops. So yeah, here's the menu that you can configure anything you want with a game. And you can choose, sometimes you'll have multiple emulators for systems if you want. You can go in and install those yourself. There's a lot of stuff you can do, like to add on to games that you install yourself. But yeah, here's Centipede running on. I actually think this was a modern remake of Centipede that I'm playing here, for the Atari 2600. But you know, it's totally functional for sure. So you got the 7800. So yeah, you can also go between these by. You don't have to go back to the main menu. You can just hit right or left, and you can go between these. It's easier to go like this. 7800 works fine. Lynx works fine. I have no idea what this system is. I just know that it runs on a NeoGeo BIOS, so I'm not really sure what that is. Famicom Disk System, haven't been able to get... This is one that requires a BIOS. I haven't been able to get this one to work yet. I do have a complete ROM set here for it. And I have, in the past, ran FDS games on... emulators on the PCs, so it should be doable. I'm not really sure what's going on here with that and why it's not working. Game Gear, everything runs perfectly fine. Game Boy runs perfectly fine. Game Boy Advance runs great. I haven't had any issues yet with anything here. Game Boy Color, again, also runs great. MAME, have had some issues with. So first of all, I didn't have a correct BIOS for it, so that was causing it to have major issues. And now that I have gotten that fixed, I'm pretty sure these will all run. But the problem is I haven't figured out how to assign a button to emulate a quarter being put into the arcade machine, which allows the machine to actually let you play. So all these games I can boot, but I haven't actually, like with a keyboard, I know what it is. You just hit the number 5 on a keyboard when you're running MAME on a PC. But here I haven't assigned it to a controller yet, so unfortunately you can boot these, but most of them won't work. So let's just see if it works. Let's see if I can find something that people have actually heard of real quick. And see if we can get something in MAME to work. I'm not going to bother trying to program the coin button or whatever, but let's see if it even boots. Let's see. Galaga 88. Let's see how this runs. Cool. So yeah, it definitely booted it. But again, like I said, unfortunately, there is no way for me to plunk a coin in on this. So I can't play anything quite yet. But oh, and that's something else I forgot. Unfortunately, this is kind of embarrassing. Unfortunately, you can't. So usually you just hit start and select to return to the main menu on the system. Not working on MAME games either, so I'm going to have to go ahead and unplug it and then plug it back in. Kind of a drag, but with something experimental as this, you kind of have to expect there to be some issues. Alright, so we've unplugged it and plugged it back in. It's booting up again for us, and maybe we'll take a look at a couple other systems before we end this video. So at this point, I think you could say this is a pretty cool device. I really like it. I think it's, just for how portable it is, it's pretty amazing. And the compatibility also is pretty great, considering it plays pretty much everything. So it's pretty much like if you want to get down on some retro games and like go over to your friend's house, this is like the thing to bring, in my opinion. So that was MAME. Still requires a little bit of work on my end to get this thing fully up and running. Once it is fully up and running, I'm going to be so stoked because I love playing arcade games. I love MAME. Love not having to pay for arcade games. Next up, there's Master System. Runs just fine. Haven't really dove too much into like this library, but I did try out ALF the other day. It ran fine. Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis here also runs perfectly fine, exactly how you'd expect it to. Now here's one to get excited about, is the MSX. So the MSX was a Japan-only computer that there's a lot of Konami titles on that you'd never play because this system was, I don't even think it was really available in the United States. So only like the most hardcore of collectors of import games would have ever seen most of these games. So here's a cool one. You know, this is kind of a game of legend that people have always kind of heard about, but hadn't really seen because I had actually never really seen this either. So this is actually, this is the first Castlevania game, and this came out, I'm pretty sure, before Castlevania did on the NES. So this predates that, as far as I know. It's super interesting because the system doesn't support screen scrolling, so every single screen is its own screen. So that's kind of weird. But I mean, like it jumps and plays exactly like you would expect Castlevania to. So that's pretty interesting. I've played a bit of this first level. There's something like where you need like keys to progress through some areas, and I haven't quite figured out how to get past those. But like you can tell just by the second screen, the level layouts are already drastically different from its NES counterpart. And there's actually multiple branching paths too, as you can see here. So I guess you could say you get a little bit more of like the Simon's Quest to it even, or something like that. Really interesting. You'll notice like the way the whip goes, it seems to be like there's like 1 or 2 more frames than there were on the NES version. I know that I'm pretty sure pretty sure that the MSX was an 8-bit computer. And well, yeah, given when it came out, it had to have been an 8-bit computer, maybe a 16-bit computer. Either way, well, if it was 16-bit, it would probably be able to actually scroll. So it does have some limitations compared to the NES, but super interesting. The MSX emulation alone makes the Raspberry Pi a pretty interesting system. N64, this has questionable compatibility, I would say. A lot of things work, like the games that you really want to play work for sure, but then you get into like, you know, like weird stuff like Buck Bumble, you're gonna have like a lot of graphical glitches. A lot of these games have some pretty major graphical glitches, and a lot of glitching when it comes to their audio. So a lot of times you're gonna want to mute these games, and they don't really run so great, unfortunately. That's one thing that the Raspberry Pi definitely has issues with, that I've noticed, is once you get into like the more 3D games, it definitely starts to have issues. So Nintendo 3DS here, this doesn't really function at all. It barely works, unfortunately. So I won't even go in and show you. NeoGeo, there's another system I wish I had gotten working. I haven't quite yet. I think it's a problem with the BIOS. We've seen NES, NeoGeo Pocket Color runs fine, really low res. PC Engine, so there's your TurboGrafx 16. This is sweet because everything works definitely perfectly fine on this, and it's TurboGrafx. I mean, nobody can afford this. Nobody can afford a TurboGrafx. It's so expensive. But yeah, as you can see, everything looks good, I guess, for whatever it is. I thought I chose Adventure Island, but so, you know, yeah, a lot of these are Japanese games, but, you know, they all work, so that's good. PSP seems to work pretty well from what I can tell. I don't have, truthfully, I don't really have that much experience playing PSP because I never owned one, but from what I can tell, all these games seem to boot and run just fine, although pretty much all the games I have on this system right now are all Japanese import games. So as you can see, it's running just like it should. Luckily, PSP is a pretty easy system to emulate that I've noticed, and I actually just got into PSP emulation in like the last year, so it's pretty cool to actually see all these games that I could never play running perfectly fine through emulation. So let's see, let's go ahead and just do PlayStation last. So this is more compatible than the Nintendo 64. Still, you'll see some issues. The biggest issue I found with this is multi-disc games can't have their save slots go between them, as far as I can tell. So say, for instance, you're playing Star Ocean here, you get to disc 2, you can never play it because you can never transfer your save file over, which will never let you actually use the second disc. So for the most part, RPGs unfortunately are completely out of the question unless they're single disc RPGs, which there are quite a few of on the system, but it is kind of a drag. Every game does boot except for Blasto. I don't know why that one won't boot, but for the most part, everything seems to run fine. I mean, you know, it runs PS1 games. And so here's where, if you want to buy a bigger memory stick for this system, this is where it's actually going to pay off, because these games are so much bigger than any other ROM. Because, I mean, you're looking at the size of a CD, so 600 megabytes to 800 megabytes on average is about the size you're looking at for all these games. So you're definitely going to need to spend some money to be able to actually hold any number of them, because I mean, you get like 20 games, that's about 15 gigabytes easily. So it's just something to think about when you're building your own, I guess. And don't worry, like when I go into how I built this and how to build it, I'll go ahead and give a parts list on. Oh no, see, I'm already done. Intelligence Cube, pretty. So this is actually a really expensive game these days for the PS1. I could never really figure it out, but I think it's a pretty interesting little game here. So, but I have been talking probably for way too long, and I doubt anybody's watching anymore. So let's go ahead and wrap this up by just taking a final look at some of the deeper menus in this. So this is where you set up pretty much everything for the system. RetroPie setup will take you to this very bare bones Linux-esque, BIOS-esque looking menus here, which are easy to navigate. It's a little bit confusing, but basically this menu here will allow you to install new packages for the system, which means new emulators and whatnot. The system is capable of running quite a few emulators that it doesn't come pre-installed on it, but a lot of them are experimental or whatever, or however they want to call it. So at the same time, the drag is that it may not work correctly. For instance, the Sega Saturn is one of those emulators, and it doesn't run at all. So anyways, that was a quick look at my RetroPie setup. Let me know what you think about it. Do you think it's better than the NES Mini? I thought it was, so I went with this. I didn't want to wait in line to get an NES Mini. I don't like Nintendo's crazy, like, limiting their quantity politics and all this stuff that they do these days. So I said, you know what? Just put in a little bit of elbow grease, put in a little bit of time, build yourself one of these, and you're going to have a much better time than you're going to have with any NES Mini. It does require a little bit more work on your end, but you get a much better product in the end, I feel like. So let me know what you guys thought of this Raspberry Pi, and keep an eye out for my upcoming video on how to actually build one of these. And that'll actually probably be a lot less long-winded than this, because I kind of rambled on with this one, but I'll keep it a little more concise with that, so you can actually just follow along and build it yourself. Honestly, doesn't take more than 15 minutes to build one. So anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I will catch you in that next video where we'll look at how to build one.